is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Good afternoon and welcome to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with not with Lerone Landis. My mouth's just going this morning, I guess. Lerone is out today, but the late Patti Fink, who did let us know that she was running late, is actually here.
There you go. We're glad to see Patti.
And I want to tell you a little bit about Leza and what we're going to talk about today. You know, long before there were equality ordinances or non-discrimination acts and anything like that, Leza and Louise Young introduced a resolution to their precinct convention, thank you, to make homosexuality in Texas legal. This is long before one of the first times this was like ever done. We're going to talk about that. She's also one of the creators of All Things Considered on NPR. Not somebody who contributed, one of the original people who created All Things Considered that is now an institution, really, on radio.
Total institution. We were just a bunch of students trying to do good work.
But more than that, her dad led the NAACP in Buffalo, New York for 20 years, and he's fascinating. And she's a serving wench? No.
No, I'm not. I am an African noble living in Scotland in the years of the early 1500s. And that's the way I sound when I'm out there. But normally I sound just like this.
And she does that at Scarborough Fair, which opens next week. And we're going to talk about all that stuff. Patti and I were talking about guests, and I said, just who's somebody interesting who doesn't have to be related to a certain thing? And she, Leza.
I'm a smorgasbord of things.
That's what you are.
Absolutely you are.
And I'm honored for you to even ask me. I'm going, why would they want me?
Because you're the smorgasbord.
That's it. And if you go away hungry, it's your own fault.
That's right.
Absolutely.
So let's go back in history.
Back in time.
Going back, way back in history. And she's going to sing for us a song that was written right after Stonewall.
All right. Yes,
so we have a lot to get to today. Where should we start? How about non-discrimination ordinance?
Non-discrimination ordinance that were in, say, Western New York. And that's one thing my dad got involved in at a probably toward both my mom and dad in the 50s and the 60s in Western New York. And one of the big things that kicked off his career there was getting laws changed when it dealt with school integration and discrimination against people of color. But it probably started even before then, because I was born in Fort Hood, Texas, and I think I may have been the baby that integrated the nursery there. And I hadn't browned up yet, so they gave me to a Chinese woman, but that was a whole nother story. But it was a great time because the military, people don't realize that's where a lot of change begins. That's where desegregation started, when they desegregated the military. But when Dad got out of the Army, he went to Buffalo, and he was a policeman for a while, and he became an undercover cop. And he went to a Malcolm X rally, and he got woke.
Wow.
He realized, the discrimination that was going on such a deeper level. So he started getting involved, and Mom was always involved also. And people would call our house going, golly, my mother's name was Ulrika, our last name is Messiah, and Mommy's calls, you Jews are all alike. You're always trying to do things for different people, blah, blah, blah. I mean, she didn't know because she didn't have she didn't have the sound. But Dad eventually became the president of our local NAACP chapter, which is a volunteer organization for about 20 years. But he and his colleague and friend, Norm Goldfarb, brought a suit against the Buffalo school system for deliberately segregating the schools. And unfortunately, the black schools were always an underling. They did not get the same kind of help financially that the white schools got, and eventually that went through. But he also ran for senator. But I thought it was also interesting that when he did run, the areas that we knew were going to be strong work. But since Dad also was the friend of the current senator for that area, we never had any major issues with our campaign headquarters and anything like that, which was good. But from there, Dad went back to school, got his graduate degrees, and eventually worked for the Labor Department. And at the Labor Department, he not only looked at hiring practices, making sure that they were legal when it came to different races, but also were women being hired properly, were people who were differently abled. During the Labor Department, one of the things he would go and make sure businesses were compliant with even having wheelchair ramps. There was a time we didn't have wheelchair ramps. There were no what do you call those things in the bathroom where you can bars
just to help you
just to help people
stand.
So he was always at the forefront of social change and gay and lesbian issues also.
Right.
He introduced that in a couple of the situations, because obviously in the black community there's there's some folks that are very conservative, and there are other folks that realize that along with freedoms of gay and lesbian people are black folks and differently abled people who may not have English as their first language. There's a lot of things that go along with discrimination. So my sister, who used to love to run to get to the phone, we would have people calling our house saying, I want to bomb you and kill you, and doing all that stuff. And
wow.
and luckily nobody ever did, but it gets to be scary because my sister still remembers those calls. But we trudged on, and we won legal battles and cases, and people who didn't want to talk to our family in the midst of all that happening, once they won, we won, it's like, everybody came around. But really it's about fairness and about equality from all different kind of areas. So that's where I think I come from, a area of human rights activities, honestly.
You do.
Yeah,
It's like the bona fides is huge.
Yeah. So it was a great way to be raised, and luckily I went to a school that was a state-run school. It was a university lab school, so I got integrated with all kind of people from all around the country, especially in Western New York and in Buffalo. So I was very, very lucky that I didn't have a lot of the turmoil, didn't feel the turmoil that did come with a lot of these changes. So I was probably very, very sheltered, but at the same time, I'm not ignorant. You can see when injustice happens around you. But I think I got involved with politics when I was about 12 years old. I think it was LBJ's election campaign or something.
In 1964.
Yeah.
When we went all the way with LBJ.
That's right. I think I was like 12. Now I'm an elder of the village, but but sure.
And I want to talk a little bit about that. Your background in civil rights, when you got here to Texas, and we need to go back for some other history, but we'll do that later, because I started this. When you went to a precinct convention, you and Louise Young.
Yeah, thank goodness for Louise Young. There are two people that influenced my political activity early on in the 70s, was Louise Young and a fellow by the name of Steve Wilkins. And it was scary to introduce some of these resolutions, but I guess one of the very first resolutions, we were supposed to go to these precinct chairs. Precinct meetings that happened after everybody voted. And again, you look back and you realize I was scared to death to introduce. I thought maybe somebody would get angry or violent, but nobody did, thank goodness. I said, okay. But it was about 20, but it was an important issue.
Part of it that, I get being scared about it, you had to out yourself. Because no straight person was going to do it, not in 1978. Then you had to say the words, and how many times do you come out in 1978 and tell people, well, I'm gay, and right now in the Texas Constitution there is wording that makes me illegal, that anything I do is illegal.
2106, and to
which
introduce
is still on
that,
the books.
Oh yeah. I think I had taken karate lessons just in case I had a problem, but we didn't have any problems. I think people were at that precinct meeting were very upstanding, but at the same time, saying the words of that you want to introduce something that where to love someone is illegal based on myth, biblical myth. And I wish people would actually understand the words that were used biblically had nothing to do with same-sex loving each other, but more to do with homosexual rape and prostitution in churches.
And hospitality.
Yeah, and hospitality. I mean, people, I don't know why people keep on, but at the same time, in those same areas, it says that abominations are also eating pork. Who doesn't like a good old barbecue sandwich? But at the same time, it's a so-called abomination. But two loving relationships was never really talked about, and it's still people are still out there not quite understanding.
So 1978 was about the first time that these resolutions were introduced at precinct meetings. And Patti, you're our political guru. So from a precinct meeting, what happens with these resolutions? What happens with these resolutions?
Actually, just a quick point of order. The precinct conventions are no more as of the 2012 election.
I was wondering about that because I remember going after. There was always these resolutions that would be going on.
Now everybody goes to the senatorial convention. So the Texas two-step after the 2008 election was revisited by the Democratic Party statewide, and they changed up the procedure. But at these precinct conventions, we had another big push in 2004 when there were so many constitutional amendments banning marriage going on around the country because we were used as a scapegoat by the Republican Party to get people to vote, because they always need somebody to demonize.
Oh yeah.
And but people bring these resolutions to the precinct conventions, which is on the night of election day. Everybody comes back to their polling location, and you pass the resolutions, and then they make their way to the senatorial district conventions, and then from there they make their way to the state convention, and then each one of those conventions has a resolutions committee, and many of them may end up in the platform. They're considered by the statewide convention for inclusion in the platform, and can be part of the the kind of the backbone policy of the party, and others are read on the floor and passed on the floor of the convention, and it can be very exciting, and people submit lots of things pick a topic.
And while nothing happened then, Dallas Gay Political Caucus, which you were part of, and Louise Young, that it had just formed. And so this was the first time people were actually hearing this. And before you change something, you have to say the words.
Right.
And that's what you were doing.
Yeah, and I just did it very calmly. Inside, I was probably going crazy, but very calmly, and looked around and smiled at people, and they said, "Oh, okay." And it was no big deal, but to get there, gosh, it took a couple days of.
Yeah, but it was a big deal.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for that, then we wouldn't have gotten to the next step. We wouldn't have gotten to the next step.
That's right.
Lawrence v. Texas, which is what invalidated 2106 finally in 2003, wouldn't have happened if you hadn't. And when I'm saying you, I mean you and then somebody in this precinct and somebody in another precinct.
We did our precinct, which was in far north Dallas, and somebody probably did something in South Dallas, and all around the city. And but it was very exciting time, and I think Don Baker was also involved with that. And he was, at the time they called him he was called Floyd until he decided to be who he was.
Because for people who don't know who Don Baker was, he was a teacher. Yeah. And had people known that he was gay, he would have been fired. Right. We had a school superintendent, Nolan Estes at the time, who said to Harriet Earhart, well, I don't think we have any gay teachers, but if we have one or two, if they ever came out, we'd just fire them. Oh, wow. And Don was the one who came out and sued the state. and Jerry Buckmeyer, federal judge, overturned the sodomy law. But it all starts with that one little step of just talking to your precinct, and that's what you did.
Yeah, and it doesn't, I look back at it, I realize I was scared at the time, and now it looks like, well, I was there, but you don't realize it, and thank you for reminding me.
Because she was explaining what it was that she did and wasn't even sure. She said, did that lead to the city ordinance? And that's what it was.
That was huge. That was huge.
It was, because it was the first baby step. And, now I'm saying baby step. I don't mean that in a diminutive way, but I mean, it was, okay, let's start talking about the issue. And it was at a time where a lot of people weren't out or weren't in a position where they could do it because they would have been fired from their jobs.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Okay, so we need to take a break in a minute. We're going to take our break a minute early, but we have lots more coming up talking about. You're a serving wench, right? No. You're royalty. You are royalty.
I'm an international royalty living in Scotland because I fell in love with a Scot. And I even wrote a song about it.
And this is Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink. Leza Mesiah is our guest, and we will be back with more right after this.
Hey guys, I'm C.D. Curvin, and you're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON FM.
And welcome back to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink. She was just explaining to our guest why she's the late Patti Fink, because she's always on time to let me know that she's going to be late. But
the late Patti Fink. I get it. Gosh, I should have had a V8.
And our guest is Leza Mesiah, who's our smorgasbord guest.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so you went to school at my school's rival, University of Buffalo. I went to University at Albany. They're like,
and don't we know it?
Right.
300 miles apart.
My sister
her sister went to the
Albany.
good school.
Yeah, she did. It was a great school. They rolled up the streets at about 6 o'clock after everybody left for the government buildings because it's the capital of New York State.
Yes, Albany is rather dead after 5 o'clock when everybody flees for the suburbs. But
it was the best thing for my sister because she decided to study. God, she was so bored. I guess I'll study. Yeah, she enjoyed
Nothing else to do.
No, yeah,
I remember my freshman year jumping out of second-floor windows into the snowdrifts outside of our dorms, right?
Yes.
So, you had a lot of snow in Buffalo, too, though.
Yes, but I was a bunny on skis. In fact, I was one of the executive directors of our ski club the year that it went incorporated. And we would take students up every other weekend to Vermont. We took them to the Alps. I got lost in the Alps. That's another story for another day. But boy, it's high. It's high up there.
Lots of snow.
But yes.
Now, one of your student activities was you were on the radio station.
Radio station.
I did WSUA, and you did
WBFO in Buffalo, and it was the beginning of all things considered. It was the beginning of NPR. People don't realize that PBS started in '68, and NPR started in '71. And our station manager, who got inducted to, I think, the Broadcast Hall of Fame several years back, his name was Bill Simmering.
And this is the Buffalo
University
student station.
Student station.
Yeah.
I mean, the student station started out like when I first entered in '70. It was on for maybe like from noon to 5 or 2 to 7. But overnight, this new phenomenon was being developed called National Public Radio. And our station manager went to Washington, D.C. to run it. But he needed content. So he came to us students at the University of Buffalo. I just need stuff. I just need news stories. I need human interest stories. And I enjoyed human interest stories. I also went to school at the time of people who are still on public radio. Terry Gross. You've got Ira Flatow. And I also did music shows. One of the music shows I did was East Meets West, basically understanding the philosophy of the Western culture with Eastern culture. But then I needed music. Once in a while, I needed Chinese music. Well, in 1971, it was against the law to import anything from China, the same way it was against the law to import those Cuban cigars. So I would get in the car and drive to Canada and bring back contraband Chinese music
to play on the radio.
To play on the radio for one of these folk music shows. I did East Meets West, All My Trials, another show called Naguantanio, which is in the Kenyatta language means unity. So all of a sudden I realized I was developing world music because we were just a bunch of geeks on the radio, trying to do different stories that were not heard, because remember, there was no talk radio in 1977. Well, actually, I came here in 1977. Let's go back. In 1970, 71, there was no talk radio. An AM was still king.
Right.
You know, and the AM radio brought me to Texas back,
I remember 77 WABC. In New York, that was like the top station in the country.
Yeah.
Cousin Brucey was the...
You know, I still listen to him. He's on Sirius now. And he does.
He just died last year, I think.
Oh, you're kidding
Yeah,
me.
you're listening to reruns.
Oh, my gosh. I was listening to 45s yesterday, all the great 45s that have been sold over 10 million.
Now explain what a 45 is.
Oh, it's a 45. It's a small little disc, the size of a CD disc almost, that you put on a record player, and you play with a kind of a needle that brings
You had
sound.
to put a center thing in because it had a big hole and it didn't fit on the little...
wow.
In the turntable.
That's right.
Yeah.
People don't know what that is.
Right.
Seems like only yesterday.
I know.
It does, doesn't it?
Oh, my goodness.
I had a little portable one, turntable that my Aunt Willie gave us. And
Good old Aunt Willie.
Aunt Willie, she was awesome. And she taught me how to write. She was a teacher. But it was a little suitcase thing that you could take anywhere you wanted and open up, and you could put your records on. And, there's so much care about records. And we kept a whole little container full of those little rings that you put in 45s so that you could stack them. Remember, you could stack up records, and if you had the right kind of player, it would play... It would raise them all up, and then it would tap one to fall and play, and then tap the next one and play it.
Oh, wow. Yes, exactly. Golly,
It was a
where
lot
does
of
time
fun.
go? But that was a really good time, because I didn't realize we didn't know what we were doing. We just wanted to go good programming. And I would also had a lot of interviews with a lot of the different music acts that would come to the University of Buffalo. And the person who brought in all those musical acts, Harvey Weinstein. At the time, he wasn't a jerk. He was just a fun guy. He was a fun guy, got along with him just fine, but unfortunately, sometimes power corrupts or something. But
to be fair, he hasn't been convicted, so the alleged jerk.
Yeah, because I probably half of what is true. The other half is probably, some people and some of these folks that would throw themselves at these musical acts that would come in. He detested them. He detested when the primarily women who would come in and want to sleep with the band. And then he had some fine words that I cannot say on the radio.
Patty's like that. She always wants to sleep with the band.
Oh,
Yeah, you know me.
Oh, yeah.
So how did you arrive, or how did the name All Things Considered become the name of such a great program?
I don't 100% remember, but what I do remember, I think it was just something that Bill Simmering, he would just say, All Things Considered, because I wanted to call the show Serendipity, and we voted on it. And All Things Considered came, but I do remember, I think it was something that the manager just kept on saying, All Things Considered, let's do this. We've done this, and we just came up with that name.
Because it's such a great, iconic name.
Yeah, it is.
For a radio show.
With serendipity stuff going on. And that's why I wanted
Leza
to call
Mesiah's Serendipity.
I wanted to call it something else. I remember calling the station manager and saying, "Hey, Dave, what was that show we did in the afternoon?" He went, "Leza, that's All Things Considered. And do you know that you helped kick off international music?" Because sometimes when you're in the midst of it, you don't always know what you're doing, especially if you're trying to do something out of excellence or out of the passion and the love that you have. I remember we had a show called Stonewall Nation, because Stonewall was out of New York State, and I didn't realize till a couple years later what that show was all about. They had Stonewall Nation, they had Dyke in the Streets, and there was a whole women.
And to be fair,
yes,
at the time, now we think of Stonewall, right? Especially here in Texas. Oh, Stonewall, it was this huge rebellion. Well, the size of the Stonewall Inn was about the size of this studio. Which, I mean...
For our viewers.
Well, no, not for our viewers, but, you know, people have an idea what a radio studio is.
Right.
It's a small room. If there were 100 people there at the time, that would have been a lot.
Yeah.
It would have been packed. So it was a small event, and the drag queens who were tired of being picked on just rebelled that night because they just laid Judy Garland to rest.
Judy Garland, absolutely.
And her funeral was that afternoon, and they came to the Stonewall Inn to mourn. And the bar was raided, and it was like, no, this is enough.
Tired of it. In fact, there's a song that went during that time, a woman named Madeline Davis, who is out of Buffalo, and she was a librarian, and she wrote the theme song to this whole movement that I haven't heard, but part of it goes, I don't want to see my brothers kicked into the dust no more, their dreams all turned to rust no more. Turned to rust no more, no more, no more. I don't want to see my sisters have to give in no more. Their dreams all turn to sin no more, no more, no more. 'Cause the Stonewall Nation's gonna have its liberation. Wait and see. Just wait and see. You can take your tolerance and stick it. We're gonna write our own ticket. Stonewall Nation is gonna be free. You can take your tolerance and shove it. We're gonna be ourselves and love it. Stonewall Nation is gonna be free.
Awesome.
And that was the
That's just off the top of her head.
And that was the We Shall Overcome. That was a anthem in New York State in the late 60s, early 70s.
That's beautiful.
And Leza sang that for me before the show, before you got here, Patty.
Right.
But Leza, she said, you know, it goes something like this, and then she belts out this song.
Yeah.
But, you know, she said, had you ever heard of Madeline Davis? And I'm like, yeah, that name. And then she sang the song, and it's like, boy, that's bringing back memories that I hadn't heard that song in 30 or more years. Yeah.
And it's out somewhere. I think it's maybe on YouTube, but we need to bring it back because it's still relevant today, and it's a dang good song.
It is.
You got My Girl, you might have Stonewall Nation. Doom, 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 doom. Yes.
So let's get back to All Stuff Considered. That was the name of that show.
Yeah, all stuff. That's right. It's all stuff considered.
Which is what this show is turning into today.
Yeah. And I was just it's like there were a group of us. It was like a collective consciousness. It's kind of like any other movement. They're a group of people that just kind of started. So you can't say one person necessarily started it, but a whole group of students created the content, created the philosophy of what we have for National Public Radio today. And there were there's NPR, but there used to be Pacifica.
Still is.
Oh, there is.
There's
out
a
of Berkeley.
Pacifica station down in Houston and one out in San Francisco.
That's the original one was in Berkeley.
Yeah.
And I remember going out there, but NPR, we always just had, I think there was a time where that we were on even keel. But NPR, we just kicked butt.
Well, NPR took off, and Pacifica was still WBLS in New York. Also, is
wow,
Pacifica.
Amazing. Okay.
But
it's a network.
NPR just took off. I think Pacifica remained kind of the radical station.
Yeah, that's
and NPR became more
mainstream because we were more, I think, more serious about it. We took our time a little bit. I think they were still being flower children at the time. But that's okay.
That was the era.
Yeah, well, I feel like there's a side of me that might be a Black Panther that fell in love with a flower child. So
you were helping create content for All Things Considered. Do you remember what kind of stories you did? You said you interviewed a lot of the musicians who came through Buffalo.
Well, it was a cornucopia of different things. You never knew what was going on. Like you might have a politician or somebody running for something want to talk. You might have a international person or national person of interest coming to the university who you just have interviews with. But more of my interviews were more of entertainment side, the same way like Terry Gross did. I mean, she took off with it. I mean, her shows were just more in depth. But at the time, she was just one of the kids, and she came out of the women's programming, and then got into just interviewing, and that's what we did. That's what we did at the university, is interviewed people, all kind of folks, but my specialty or my area of interest were people who were in the entertainment business. So I remember going and interviewing Richie Havens in the hallway, or going to Anne Murray's, when she was real popular with her "Beneath the Snowy Welter, Golden Green," Snowbird, and all these popular people, and you wanted to ask them questions that were relevant to the time or to their music. And then also we had a lot of international students, so you just never knew what you were going to talk about. That's why it was just what seemed of interest. I think when I think this was before, what was the name of the big music festival?
Woodstock.
I think this was before Woodstock, but they wanted to do a secondary Woodstock, but I don't know if I think Canada had one, and we went up to Canada, like the first time we ever did a remote. That was huge.
Well, NPR was working on like zero budget. They were like,
well, we were
KNON.
students. Again, overnight, hundreds of radio stations across the country turned into NPR stations. They were running for maybe 5 hours a day, and all of a sudden we went to 24 hours a day. Or actually, we went until the last student got tired and turned the radio station down. Because I remember being a third-class engineer, and I would, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm tired. Time to go home now. And you did your readings, turned the radio station off, and then somebody at 6 a.m. turned it back on again.
Wow.
See, okay, I'm not going to say Albany's better than Buffalo. However, our station was 24 hours, but that's okay.
Ours stopped when the last student got tired.
That's funny.
Oh, yeah.
Or I guess during exams, the station was a little bit shorter.
Oh, that's another thing. I interviewed, which is great for classes. I would interview a lot of my professors. A lot of our professors were international scholars. So we had a great group of folks that came down. I think that helped my couple of my grades. I'm thinking, basically interviewing them. But Jerry, oh gosh, we had a bunch of folks. In fact, one of my main professors, I remember, his name is Molifia Sante, is one of the foremost professors in the country on African history and African American history, politically as well as historically. The man's incredible. And I remember interviewing him and Rita Elvis, and at the same time being vice president of the Graduate Student Association. So, remember, I interviewed the provost. You interviewed people of education, what's going on. But it's been so long ago, I've forgotten so much. But I knew I was there. And it was an exciting time, and we became the voice of what is NPR today, not only from a news standpoint, but also international music, international programs. I love their Irish jig. They've got an Irish program that comes from Ireland, and you've got some music from India. We were playing all those things and talking to people from around the world from a different perspective than it's from our tiny community there in Buffalo.
That's really amazing, because all of those areas, all those things have been more than considered now. Just exploded on not just NPR, but on all forms of communication.
Yeah, because nobody was playing music from India or China, and we were one of the few stations that even had Tino Mejia. I remember he had a Mexican, basically Hispanic music, Spanish music, Mexican music. That was like, wow, unheard of in 71. Mm-hmm. So we had to come up with all this new, interesting content that you didn't hear on regular radio. That was basically rock and roll. And then a few, kind of your news came on, but nothing was 100% news. Now I think we have too much news.
Well, at the time, news was, top of the hour, 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes.
Right.
There just wasn't any such thing as a news station. There was no talk radio. That started really in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And
the news cycle was certainly not 24/7 as it is today.
Right.
No, gosh.
Right.
But NPR is the first one that started doing long, in-depth programming instead of that 2 minutes, 5 minutes. We would do 10 minutes, 15 minutes, a half hour, and occasionally an hour.
And the thing was, because they were college radio stations, you didn't have to turn a profit. So if you wanted to try something like, let's try music from China, I could just see, KVIL with music from China. Not going to work.
And we tried to make it educational. That's like the East meets, well, here we have Yehudi Menuhin and Ravi Shankar playing a interesting jazz piece from this, and we tried to find things that were so different, so unusual. I don't think kids have necessarily changed, that their style of music may have changed, but always wanting to find something new. But at that time, to find something new was news, but really in-depth news versus just the 2 minutes or the 3 minutes, the 5 minutes.
And you're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink. We need to take a break. Our guest when we come back will be the Moor of Dundee, and we'll be back right after this.
Hi, this is Valletta Lil, and I listen to Lambda Weekly. I hope that you will too.
And this is Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON FM. I'm Dave Taffet here with the late Patti Fink. Lerone will be back with us next week. He's busy helping a friend today with some moving. Leza Mesiah is our guest, and on today, she's our smorgasbord guest, or our all stuff considered guest.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
She is, I wish we could show the costume that she's in, and by that I mean she's literally in costume, because from here she goes down to Scarborough Fair, where you are the Moor of Dundee.
I am the Moor of Dundee. I love historical reenactment. It all started, I think it started in kindergarten with Sleeping Beauty, and I just never grew out of it. But I always wanted to be Prince Philip and his sword and shield.
Oh, wow.
But I always loved history. And my biggest reason for being this particular character, which is an African character, and during that time, you realize that Africa was very much involved in the development of the Renaissance, whether we know it or not. The Renaissance for Europe actually started in Italy, but for hundreds of years, those Italians, and there really wasn't Italy in the 16th century. In fact, Italy, the name is more of a modern day name that Mussolini kind of put together that boot. At the time, you were either Roman, Tuscan,
Genoan.
Exactly. You weren't any of those things, but those people within that boot would go to Timbuktu, which is in Mali, Africa, and that's where the first university is. So I feel a need to bring this African culture into this English village, English town, of which there are at least 260 of these Renaissance fairs across the nation. But my music that I really, really enjoy is from Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and England. So I'm a generic African noble, having fallen in love with a Scot. So I became the Moor, M-O-O-R, which in Latin just means dark. A lot of the Moors were North African and they were Islamic. I played this either as a Coptic Christian from Ethiopia, or I could very well have been Jewish during this time, but during the Renaissance, you really didn't want to be Jewish because they were, it's like Queen Isabella. I feel like she was the first Antichrist because she basically kicked the Jews and the Muslims out of Spain. And that's when the plague started, because they also thought that cats were demonic. But we play history not necessarily the way it was, but the way it should be. So the Moor of Dundee, and there were people of African descent throughout Europe for Da Vinci. There would be no Michelangelo. And yet the first Duke of Florence was the product of Clement VII, the Pope, and an African serving woman who was not a slave. And yet he was the first, Alessandro de' Medici was the first Duke of Florence. So I try to bring an African perspective to people who don't realize that Africans were there in Europe just like, everyone else. And that's why I think that new movie, Mary Queen of Scots, I love it, because they get some people of color in there. People don't realize during the time of Scarborough, 1533-ish, that Queen Margaret's main lady in waiting was Black Ellen. But it gets Africa hot in Texas. So I wear these cotton African clothing that are very ornate.
Right.
I get them. I think there's a place here called African Connections down in South Dallas. Somewhere that I get all these. They go to Ghana and Nigeria all the time. But being there at Scarborough, I tend to be. I talk like a Scot, and the reason that I talk like a Scot is because I had a Scottish music teacher from age like second grade through high school. And I love the music. She taught me all this music, and sometimes I even sing in Gaelic. I sing in Hebrew, I sing in French, I sing in a whole bunch of languages. But one of the things that I found wonderful is when I went to Ireland one year, and I'm in this little pub outside of Shannon, and these boys are playing this American music. I did not come to Ireland to hear American music. So I said, hey, do you know Cuckles and Mussels, Molly Malone, anything? And they look at me, being African-American, and this was quite maybe 20, 30 years ago. They went, do you? I said, well, can I borrow your guitar? So the first thing out of my mouth was Molly Malone, alive, alive, oh, Cuckles and Mussels, alive, alive, oh. And then there's silence in this pub. There are a couple hundred people there. They've been coming there for the last 300 years. The place went crazy. Oh, my God. And I played for about an hour, handed the boys back their guitar.
Did you get some tips?
Oh, better, even better. I go to the bar, and this old man has the map of Ireland written on his face. There's a certain, there's certain ethnics, they have certain ethnic traits, but he had the map of Ireland on his face, and he looks at me and go, gal, where you from? Our own children don't know these songs. How do you know them? Where are you from? And I went, Texas. I could have said New York. It didn't matter. And at the end, he's kind of mad. Had a wee bit of drams of Scotch in him, or good Irish whiskey. And he says, gal, very mad. Those African Moors came and stole our children. And I said, and cousin, some of us came back. And to this day, this is like 30 years ago, I have never laughed so hard. I laughed with this man and laughed, and then he proceeded to introduce me to every kind of ale and beer at that bar.
And you were there for the next 2 days.
And I was there for the next 10 days. And then, because people, obviously I went there, I always say I went with 199 Irish Texans and me, the one French girl. And then, of course, I was a celebrity after that, which was so enjoyable. But it also shows you that, talking to people and music can really cross different genres. Like I remember I think one of my heroes, local heroes, was Tim Seelig with the Turtle Creek Chorale, and I was in the first year of the women's chorus. And one of the things that he did, and one of his philosophies, is that music can change hearts. So once in a while, I'll be at Scarborough, and I get these good old boys who looking at me going, hey, Gail, can you play that thing? And I come out with a Danny Boy. And the next thing I'm hearing is, I'm sorry, my mama used to sing that. I'm sorry, my mama used to sing that song. Because it hit their heart. And, they probably don't know a black person. But if you come to people, I think most people are open when you put a love bubble around them. And I think so many people are afraid of each other because they don't know each other, you don't look at each other, and you just put a love bubble around people, and they can gravitate to you. And then the few people that want to be hateful, there's something wrong with them anyway. So, but Scarborough, I just love playing the game. I love the music. I love dressing. And I don't call this a costume. I call this garb.
garb.
It's an extension.
And the reason I call it costume is because people go in costume to Scarborough Fair, and you're in costume to perform. So I meant it in that term.
Oh, absolutely.
Not that, you could walk down the street in that and somebody would just think you're wearing African garb.
Right.
But to me, I'm thinking Scarborough Fair, and that's the context of it.
Oh, yeah, and Scarborough is great. I mean, it's great for families and kids. I mean, where else can you ride a real elephant?
This is true.
A real camel. A kid goes, well, what you do? Kid rides, 10 years old, say he rides a camel and an elephant, and he goes back to school. So what you do this weekend? Oh, I rode a camel. No, come on, what did you really do? But it's just a great way, and I think we encourage the diversity, because you've got a German contingency, you've got a Spanish contingency, you've got we're developing more African characters, but again, everybody, it's the king's glove is up. Tudors had a lot of diversity in their courts, but yeah, we're in England, we're in North England, and most people, I don't care if you're black, white, in between, you've got a whole bunch of stuff in your genes. If you're African American, because of slavery, 70% of us, 80% of us are going to have some European in us. So, and once when I came down here, coming from the north to the south, I had that, and I remember this one old boy we're sitting there talking about some pretty heavy stuff, like Klan stuff, and I'm saying, but I remember saying, but Jimmy, those people are very, very hateful. And I didn't get that chip. I didn't get angry, but he's telling me about his friends, the Klan, and then I look at him and I say, you and I have the same great-great-grandfather. And he looks at me with his little red hair and blue eyes and says, because we are related and we are connected. So, and I think the more we start realizing that we are very related, then I think you have less hate out there, you have less fear out there, and so when I go to this Renaissance fair, I'm bringing a whole lot of that with me, trying to cross genders, trying to cross socioeconomic by just being happy and singing to people.
Now, one of the bits of trivia you gave me before the show was about education, that the stereotype is, of course, Europeans very educated, Africans they're not at all. But where was the first university in the world?
Was in Mali, Africa, the center of Africa. The University of Timbuktu is a real place. Google it, Timbuktu, and you'll see that in 900 AD or 1000, before anything, that you had people from Europe, primarily those along the Italian boot, coming to Africa to learn and to study, which is why I'm not surprised that the Renaissance for Europe started in that Italian area. So, and we have a lot of folks that were in the Dark Ages when Africa was in its prime. And you have, it's not just Egypt, and they always want to put Egypt in the Middle East. It's in Africa. I've been there. I've floated down the Nile, and they look like...
And so is Libya. I grew up in Libya.
You did?
And that's in Africa as well.
Yeah.
North Africa. People go, oh, it's in the Middle East. No, it's in...
Right.
It can be considered part of the Mediterranean rim.
And where the pirates were, the Barbary Coast.
Yes.
That's all.
Exactly.
Well, and also the Spaniards, who were so instrumental in exploring the world.
Yeah, the North.
Where did their civilization come from? Also across the Mediterranean, the Moors.
Sure, the North Africa, because I took my mom and dad to southern. My mother wanted to see southern Spain, and yeah, those Moors were there 800, 900 years before they got kicked out by Queen Isabella, with unfortunately the early Christians who wanted to kill all the Jews.
Okay,
and the Muslims.
Queen Isabella trivia.
Yes.
When did her order to expel the Jews end?
Probably, I don't know.
Do you know, Patti?
No.
When Columbus sailed?
No, that was the first day of the Inquisition, the day he sailed.
Wow, yeah, that's just another way. Inquisition was just another way to steal the Jews' land.
Okay, so do you know when it ended? Do you have any idea?
Is it still going?
No, 1975.
1970.
Wow.
Yeah.
1970. It was in effect for 400 years.
Wow.
No, 500 years. So,
Yeah, it was not. Yeah, I swear, and that's why I say I think she was one of the first antichrists, because that Inquisition was just a way to, that's who people don't realize, that they always want to say, the Jews killed Christ. No, Christ was Jewish. It was a political thing. He was into peace and So
I love that you're doing the Renaissance Fair, and you said it's starting up soon again.
It starts next week, and now when I leave here, I'm going to a rehearsal because I also play with a Irish band, Celtic, our in-house band, and it's just fun. It's a fun situation, but I'm also learning because this year the in-house band is playing some of the court music, some of the more traditional music that really was played in the 16th century. Because so much of our things, what do you do with a drunken sailor early in the morning, that you'll hear at pub sing are probably more in the 1800s. But where else can you hear this traditional music? And I figure that, and I write these pirate songs. And when a couple years ago, when I heard the Oscar-winning song was, it's hard in life for a pimp. It's hard in life for a pimp. I said, my pirate songs have hope. They have hope. I could, so I got to figure out how to sell a pirate song and a sea shanty. But it's educational, and also one of the things people realize, I see the women who look like wenches with their boobs way up here, but that wasn't a big thing. The thing that was really scandalous, if you showed your ankles. Oh, really? My God. Yes, and that wasn't the boobs. And then the guys had these cod pieces that were kind of showing off their trinkets. And that was just the style of the day, and people didn't think anything of it.
Aaron and I haven't been in a long time, but the last time we went was probably 10, 15 years ago, and we met some friends out there, and they said, well, just call us on our cell when you get here. So I called them, and I said, hey, we're here. And they said, oh, where you at? We'll come meet you. And I said, oh, we're over by the food and the jewelry. And I hung up. And I 1, 2, 3. Here they ring again. Ha ha, that was funny. The food and the jewelry is everywhere.
It's everywhere.
We're by the food and the jewelry.
Oh, that's so funny. But you can be educated there, or you can just get drunk. But hopefully you won't get drunk because you're going to be driving, and that's what Lyft is for.
Do they still do the human chess?
Oh yes, the human chess match, because you learn how to sword fight. In fact, I encourage, if you're into history, to join the cast. I think they have cast callings in December or January, and our show is more of a family show, whereas a lot of Houston is a little more body. We have our body sides, but to me, I feel like I'm a black Mother Goose. I let kids play my guitar. I sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star 10 times a day. But it's you can also learn what was going on in the 16th century. And how, women were not considered very high on the evolutionary scale. In fact, the peasant woman was more likely to have healthy children than the noble woman, because at 12 years old they put them in those corsets, changed your body, so you had a lot of high mortality rates with noble women. And so a lot of people, I want to be a noble. No, you don't. You want to be a peasant or a gypsy, somebody who's comfortable. That's whose genes survive. But there's music there, and but it's also, part of it's a circus. There are some folks that go from fair to fair to fair and live that, and there are people like me that I need to go home every night and get a shower. But I love the historical reenactment of it and learning about what was going on and how it relates today, and how we are all connected. And so when I say, I join the Scottish clan, that's with a C, but because we all are, somehow related to it. And then there's a whole, there's like the whole thing with Russia, and Germany at the time. I think that's who the Pope was from at the time. But it's
then
everywhere.
She says, excuse me a moment, I need to answer my cell phone. It's a call from my wife.
Oh,
just
no,
like
we
back
do not bring out, because cell phones were not around in the 1500s.
They weren't. Well, how did people call and tell you to meet them by the jewelry?
Well, the thing is, I don't. I have to go into the bathroom or behind stage, but you don't bring it out. I do not come out of character. It's a character, but it's a fun.
So you're in character for how long at a time?
Oh, all day. I get there. We have our morning meeting about 9 o'clock, 9:30. Then the gates open at 10 a.m. and the musicians play as you walk in, as the cannon goes off, and the king and queen welcome you.
And Scarborough Fair is Saturday and Sunday for through Memorial Day.
Memorial Day Monday. And if you've served in the military, you want to be there Memorial Day Monday, because we do make who have surgery.
And Leza, we are completely out of time. And she kept asking me, "What are we going to talk about for an hour?
Yeah.
We could talk another hour.
We need another couple of hours.
Leza, come back on any time next week or just.
We're not sure.
And have a good week, and everybody be best.
Thank you, Leza.
Oh.